Chris? Hi.
Hello.
Good morning, guys.
You're on mute.
Hello?
Hi, Eric.
There
Hi,
we go.
Lois.
Hi.
Hey.
Good. So, oh, good. Rebecca.
It's like Chris is just joining right now.
Yeah, Chris and Rebecca.
Nice.
Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
Morning. How are you? Good to
Good.
see you.
Yeah.
Hello.
How's everybody? Monday morning.
Great.
I've been looking forward to this, so thanks for setting it up.
Good, good. Glad you could all be here. So Chris, I don't see and I can't hear.
I am here. I'm going to join on video in a few minutes. I'm just listening
Okay.
on mute for a little while. Hi, everyone.
Good, good, good. So, yeah, thanks for doing this. We've got a lot of interest in the topic, and you guys are all great, so I think it will be really interesting. So, you know, I know Eric and Chris know each other. I don't know about the rest. So I thought, you know, we'd kind of meet and, you know, tell a little bit about our backgrounds, what we'd like to talk about, what our views are, and then, you know, go through the program topics. I just put down some general thoughts, but want to know what you guys think. So, Chris, maybe tell us a little bit about you and your thoughts and what you'd like to talk about.
Sure. Maybe someone else can go first. I'm listening.
Okay. How about you, Eric? We'll start with you.
Sure. Happy to. Nice to meet you guys. I appreciate you having me. So, my name is Eric Peters. I run One River Asset Management. I'm the CIO. We're about $1 billion firm, and we run a number of. We actually run 5 different funds, and we're in the process of launching a 6th that's focused on inflation. So we run 3 different vol funds. One of which is a market neutral fund that we would say is kind of informed by our macro views, but is also just looking for great opportunities, you know, in vol markets. And so kind of a very high, sharp market neutral strategy. We've got 2 long vol funds, which are you know, dedicated long volatility. One is cross asset and discretionary. Has had pretty terrific year this year. And one is systematic and equity only, and also kind of long vol strategies have done pretty well this year. So, and then we have two trend strategies. So systematic. So we're a firm that blends systematic and quant investing. My background is I've been doing this since I started in the industry in 1989 in Chicago, out in the pits, and started trading for myself and kind of made my way through investment banks as a prop trader before joining kind of the hedge fund part of the business. And I launched One River 7 years ago, and I write a weekly piece that's pretty widely followed in the industry, where I spend a lot of time talking about macro ideas and politics and economics and geopolitics and things like that. So anyway, elections are very interesting to me, as is anything that affects portfolios and what we do in trading, and so certainly have some thoughts about it, whether they're right or wrong. I guess time will we'll see. But anyway, that's One River, based in Greenwich, Connecticut. We started in California, so my career in Europe and London and California, New York, and now Connecticut. So kind of bounced all over the place.
Sounds good. Good. Chris, can you hear us? Unmute. Okay.
I can. Hi, everyone. I am finally all set up. Hi, Rebecca. Nice to meet you. So my name is Chris Solars, and I work for an alternative investment consultant. Cliffwater advises on about $75 billion across hedge funds, private equity, private credit, and real estate and real assets. I work on the hedge fund side, and one of my passions is following along with the market. As an allocator, I have the lucky job to be able to speak to dozens of smart CIOs like Eric and pick their brains about what they think is going to happen. And I also write a weekly macro email piece. Eric and I both sometimes send out almost at the on the same hour of the day, sometimes on the weekend, on Sunday morning. So I think it's such an important question. Of all the big themes that are coming up, this is the one that is binary. We don't know when the pandemic will end. We don't know how the U.S.-China deglobalization theme will end, or European disunification. But we do know that the election is coming up in just over a month now. So I think what could be interesting, I've been thinking about this, Lois. One way to approach it would be, to talk a little bit about the simplistic way that we first thought about the outcome. Like, if the Democrats win, there'll be more focus on renewable energy, infrastructure, healthcare. If the Republicans win, there'll be more focus on defense contractors, oil and gas, banks. Quite overly simplistic. If the Democrats win, we probably will see a sell-off in the market. If the Republicans win, because that means decreased taxes, decreased regulation, we'd probably see a rally. And I think this was the theme that managers and active investors were thinking about at the beginning of the year. And now it has very much shifted. One wild card, of course, is going to be the fiscal and monetary stimulus from the central banks. Because you can imagine, even if we do increase taxes and we get a redistribution of wealth theme in a Biden presidency, this could easily be offset by money flooding. So, like, the market is not necessarily going to go down. It could very well continue to go up because we're just printing money. So that's always the wild card. But even more so now, we're talking about the disputed elections and how long this process will go. The market doesn't like that kind of uncertainty, and the forward vol surfaces are already pricing in extremely elevated vol surfaces in November around what's expected to be a disputed election, a political crisis, and ultimately a Supreme Court crisis. So these are some of the themes I've been thinking about, and happy if we like those ideas, we can run with them, but happy to brainstorm a little bit more this morning.
Okay, sounds good. So Rebecca, you're kind of in there. Um, so tell us what you're doing, and I know you have thoughts on the contested dispute part.
Yeah, and good morning, everybody. So you can read my bio in Lois's wonderful invitation email she sent around. It just makes me sound so much better than I am. But the basics are that I have been working at the confluence of the public-private sector my entire working life. I've been in asset management since 2005. I've had a bunch of roles on the buy side as well as at Goldman Sachs Asset Management, GC, COO, CCO, jack of all trades. But I love anything heavily regulated because my first life was in politics, and my last job in that life was working for Joe Biden as his press secretary, and pretty much everyone who worked for Joe stayed in touch with Joe. So the alum club is pretty strong and loyal, and we're all working for free right now for him, including me. So I hit pause on my asset management career, and in 35 days we'll hopefully start being able to have conversations to resume it. And I'm sitting here in Manhattan. You know, for macro markets, total government outcomes matter. So this is just a fun time to have a brain that's half on the public side and half on the private side. And I find the contested election rhetoric to be very overheated because the chance of a contested election actually creating crises is very, very small because it's all been planned for by the framers. So, you know, if it becomes useful, I can absolutely lend a minute or two to a conversation that explains that pretty much all of this will be over by December 14th. And if it isn't, there are some weird default states that could take place, including there being a Republican vice president and a Democratic president. And I don't know, Lois, if you ever sort of put screen share on these Zooms, but happy to show the flow chart for people who are kind of interested in that piece. But I think the punchline for the talk essentially is that, you know, for investors, it's a time to diversify and build out more sophisticated portfolios, especially in some of the sectors that you tagged, with healthcare, energy, financials, and tech absolutely being those sectors that are going to see the biggest movements in the case of a Biden win, which is at about 86% right now. According to our internal stats, 97% chance that he'll carry the common vote. Yeah, and you know, a congressional split, which is the other question that Lois raised, is, you know, essentially that a fiscal stimulus is unlikely. I mean, basically, it means lots of swings and lots of changes are much less likely. But you know, an interesting dynamic that people don't think about when there's a passing of the baton from one president to the other is that especially this particular outgoing administration, knock on wood, is that it takes an awful lot of time for things to happen, simply because for no other reason than the incoming administration is dependent on the outgoing administration for things as basic as security clearances. And we're certainly not going to be seeing, you know, really nice, neat binders of pass the baton, here's the current state of play on policy X stuff. So a Biden administration is probably not even going to come into full swing until the second quarter earliest. You know, markets have a time to bake a bunch of stuff in. So everyone's like, ooh, chaos, you know, and a lot of you know, Eric would know this better than I, but a lot of portfolios are short vol right now. But things will be fine. Things will be fine. It's a robust setup the framers left us, and more to say about that, but that's basically my take and who I am.
Okay. Any responses to what you guys have said, or?
Rebecca, I'd love to see if you wouldn't mind sending that flow chart and anything else that that you have around. Just emailing, you know, kind of before. I think that would be super helpful. I certainly wouldn't want to comment on it before having seen it. I have a very open mind about, you know, kind of about what's happening in terms of vol. I think that the market is definitely priced for a sloppy outcome. I think if it's as sloppy as my worst case scenario, then vol remains underpriced. And I think if we see a really you know, if we see a significant Biden win, I think vol across asset classes is going to come off, you know, quite dramatically. You know, I really hope that that's the outcome. Not, you know, not because I'm a Democrat or Republican. I really am kind of, I wouldn't call myself either. But I think that for the country, having, you know, a really distinct outcome here is super important. And so when we do our kind of modeling of different scenarios, by far the worst ones are ones where there's just a very narrow result, and I have strong conviction that that both parties are going to try to play games with the election, because they always do. But I think this time around, I think the Republicans are I think some of the things that they're already doing are so offensive to the idea of democracy that I think, if we have a kind of a narrow outcome here in terms of what things look like, I just expect it to be a very very difficult period of time. I speak with a decent number of senior military people, and I'm pleased to just see how I think that they've pre-positioned themselves to want to be very neutral in this. So, but I kind of expect I expect the worst out of the current president. So, and I think that that's the right position to take. It has been and kind of continues to be. Remember my wife, who we've been married for 20 odd years, but she was the only female and the youngest editor at the New York Post. And so when I first met her, this was in kind of the late 90s. I remember I didn't even know who Donald Trump really was, other than I'd seen The Art of the Deal. He seemed like the most, I don't know, offensive type person that I would know. I just thought, like, that type of person. I didn't really know anything about him. And Mara would tell me that Trump would call her roommate, because her roommate was the chief gossip columnist, and would call her in the middle of the night and just spew out all kinds of stories and untruths and things like that. And actually called her one night to announce that he was getting divorced without having told his wife. And so she found out that Donald was divorcing her on the front page of the New York Post one day. And so when I heard that, I was just like, this guy is just, it's got to be the worst human being that that I could kind of imagine. And so here we are, now we're coming to this election. So that's, I feel like I've just paid attention to this guy for so long. Nothing would surprise me out of him. And I do have faith that that our institutions are strong enough to deal with this. But I think it'll be I think if it's a narrow outcome, it'll be extremely sloppy, and I think the media will go bananas with it. And so hopefully we end up in a good place. But anyway, that's my bias coming into this, just a very open mind. In terms of what we're doing in markets, we're actually not doing a ton in U.S. equity vol, because it is pretty elevated. And I think that I don't know if it's fairly priced right now, but it's, you know, it's not wildly off in terms of pricing the potential. Because as I said, I think if it's an ugly outcome, vol is still cheap, and if it's a decisive Biden win, I think vol is way too expensive right now. And that creates a tricky dynamic for holding position. So most of the things that we're doing are actually in overseas vol and Japan, Europe, and South Africa, and things like that.
Rebecca, I liked your, I don't know, almost your certainty that things are overblown. And maybe but I do feel like anxious really for the country, not even my portfolio, just the scenario that Trump rejects the election outcome and that he uses his power as president to prevent this decisive outcome seems like almost a base case scenario, right? And how do you see that playing out? I mean, there's no way he's going to concede. It's probably going to be, you know, whether perhaps the only case is a true Biden blowout, which maybe we have. I still don't see him conceding in that. You know, he's been sowing the seeds for, you know, for calling this the biggest voter fraud in election history, right? So that's the worry I think that everyone the armchair quarterbacks are gripping to. Do you not see, like, how do you balance that with your outlook that things are perhaps a little bit overblown?
Yeah, so, you know, just because there's a toddler throwing a tantrum in aisle 2 doesn't mean, you know, that the entire supermarket's going to need to shut down to accommodate the fact that Trump doesn't concede. You don't need the loser to concede for the winner to win. So essentially, I agree that things won't be decided on November 4th, but they never are, right? I mean, you don't have an election certified until December 14th. And even if the electors, you know, have issues going on December 14th, and the corner pocket shot there is that there are 5 Republican legislature states where, you know, if things are close enough, perhaps those Republican legislature appointed electors will become faithless electors and vote for Trump Pence, irrespective of what the actual count is, which is very unlikely for other technical reasons. But the corner pocket shot is that then perhaps that group of electoral votes could go to Trump and tip things, right? That's unlikely, and if that were to happen, an entire other set of dominoes goes into effect, and the election gets tossed to the House and the Senate, and the House will then vote for, you know, one state, one vote, 50 votes will vote with 26 votes take all for the president, and the Senate will vote for the vice president. And if that doesn't happen by Inauguration Day, there's a whole other piece to the flow chart. And until things get settled, the vice president will be acting president. So there could be a Republican senator acting president until the House votes for somebody. And if they can't agree, then it becomes Nancy Pelosi, right? So long story short is all of the ambiguity has already been planned for in the fine print. And we already know, because states have taken care of this, that final vote tallies won't come in until November 17th. I think, I can't remember which state said that any ballots received by November 17th will still count. But the electors, you know, vote by December 16th, and then the election gets certified, I think, like certified by the 6th by roll call vote in the Senate. So assume like a crazy, ridiculous tantrum after November 4th until that date. And, you know, worst case, the Secret Service and the U.S. Marshals will need to escort out the loser. But, you know, absent him hiding in the bunker and taking a cyanide pill, right? The show goes on, and we will be fine. We will be fine. The good news is, you know, people say, oh, a Supreme Court crisis, oh, constitutional crisis. No, because this type of outcome, if it were to be thrown to the courts, right, and everybody says, oh, but now he's got the court stacked 6-3 with his people or conservatives. No, you can't just bring any case to the Supreme Court. You have to have two things called, you know, standing and something else that's technical. And there is a limit to what types of court cases the Senate, the Supreme Court is allowed to take on, and they are not allowed to take on anything that's called a political question. That's reserved for the political branches. You know, if you needed to pick the two most important branches of government for purposes of, you know, Trump going crazy, November 4th, it would be the executive and the legislature. A whole bunch more to say on that, but the punchline for people interested in how this affects markets is that the pundits will have a field day because that's what pundits do, right? But those who actually understand how our democracy works and understand the various, you know, provisions of the Constitution know that there's just going to be a long tail on the answer, but there's a limit to how much he can do beyond voter suppression.
Well, I think that for whatever it's worth, everything that you just said makes sense to me. The risk has to do with voter suppression. So for instance, the risk is as I see it and understand it. So for instance, you know, Wisconsin and Florida get a lot of, or North Carolina for that matter, you get a lot of mail-in votes that come in, and you have Republican-dominated legislatures that forget about how they suppressed votes on the day of the vote. They do a good job of disqualifying all kinds of mail-in ballots, and they do so in a way that most objective observers would say, yeah, that's not fair, but they manage to do it because I think that's what they'll try to do. They'll try to do as much as they can get away with. So I think the real, like from my perspective, the real crisis is not Trump lost the election and he's kicking and screaming like a baby in aisle 3. It's that actually the Republicans did a sufficiently good job to suppress enough mail-in ballots, let alone suppress actual votes on the day in the districts that would have likely voted predominantly Democrat, that you end up with an election where it gets certified that Trump won, and kind of most people know that he didn't actually win, or at least a lot of people believe he didn't actually win, and that's where you get to the real crisis. I think the path that you just described, I would agree that works out fine. But I'm curious whether you're concerned about well, it sounds like you are, because you're like everything's fine other than voter suppression. So how do you think about voter suppression?
Well, the biggest risk around voter suppression is to legitimacy of the winner or loser, not the declaration of a winner or a loser, right? So in terms of policy and impact on markets, it's not necessarily the same question, right? Because you're going to have a set of policy outcomes based on who wins, and there will be a winner. The real knock is on American democracy. But I don't see there being blood in the streets as a result. you know. Certainly there wasn't when, there was a popular vote that went Hillary's way and an electoral vote that went the other way, right? So certainly, when Stacey Abrams lost Georgia, what are the losers going to do except, set up a nonprofit and make sure that it doesn't happen again, right? Or run again. So lack of legitimacy of the outcome does not lead necessarily to anything that a market would be impacted by.
I don't agree, but that's fine. I mean, that's what makes a market. I think if you have a if we have a result that is viewed by an enormous or by a large portion of the country as being illegitimate, I guess it's possible that markets would find that acceptable, but I doubt it. I don't. That's the problem with this election. I think no matter who wins, I think even if Biden wins by a narrow amount, I think that'll be a good outcome for the country, and that markets probably relax. But I think that there'll be probably a quarter of the country that thinks it was illegitimate anyway. Maybe a third, and they'll just have to deal with it. But I think that'd be a good outcome. I think that the frightening outcome from a national perspective is one where various forms of voter suppression by the Republicans yield a Trump victory that is viewed as being illegitimate, and then that gets pressed up through the courts. And I do think that there would be a lot of violence in the streets, actually. I don't know how long that would last. I think probably a lot longer than you sound like you'd expect. And you might be right. I might be wrong, but I think that there would be a lot of civic unrest if we see something like that. And I don't know how. And I don't really know. I don't know how that plays out. All I know is my fallback is that we're dealing with a guy who got divorced on the front page of the New York Post. So, the things that I would naturally think, when I put myself in people's shoes and try to think, well, how are they thinking about situations? And I've got a pretty good imagination, but when it comes to just this kind of stuff, I think Trump ranks amongst the best in the world at wiggling his way out of anything. So I don't know what to expect, but I think there'd be all kinds of surprises in that in that situation. And I think he's very clearly playing for that, right? So it's not like this is a wild, it's a wild scenario. I mean, I think it's
in the backdrop of this global pandemic, where 40% of the country is going to vote by mail, makes the inevitability of voter suppression and much higher, because of all of the games that can be played specifically with these mail-in ballots, right? They have to be secured and untampered within the other envelope. And if you write your name Chris instead of Christopher, if you were voting in person, people, the poll workers help you with that, and that's immediately disqualified. So there's going to be a lot more disqualified votes. It just creates a whole nother element of uncertainty.
Well, keep in mind that shenanigans will go on across all 50 states for sure, but the only ones that really count are 5 battleground states, and in those 5 battleground states, actually it's really 4 now. Biden is up by at least 3, and all of those were carried by Trump the last time around. In fact, the only battleground state that he's carrying right now is North Carolina, where he's ahead by 0.3%, which is the thinnest of margins, right? So North Carolina is probably going to be the place where you see the worst of the games, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. You could lose North Carolina and you're still fine. So, you know, they're talking about, you know, okay, blue wave versus blue tide versus, you know, red mirage, and then one of those two things, but it's just then a waiting game. So unless you're so focused on micro swings during this time as a CIO, it's volatility, you know, volatility is your friend. Let everyone else freak out and not understand how the process works, and you know, you and your investors are fine. In terms of the sectors, healthcare, energy, financials, tech, I just had a question for Lois. Like on healthcare, did you mean like the large managed care organizations, or did you mean like medical devices or pharma or anything within that? And then energy, was that any like US energy or energy versus renewables? And tech, did you mean like the big tech companies, or did you like Apple is more, you know, a consumer products company at this point than anything? But just wanted to make sure that I was going to be able to be crisp on outcome impact on those sector specific things. And I don't want to change the subject prematurely, but I just want to toss that in as like a thought bubble that I had as we were prepping for the call.
Sure. Yeah, these are just broad categories. So it's, you know, really what you guys want to talk about, but, you know, there are different parts of it. So, you know, however, you know, you want to define technology or energy, you know, it's really up to you.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'd be prepared if we were to get that granular, and that'll be our moderator's prerogative of which of which of those might see a Biden win as preferable, and which might see a Trump win as preferable. And there's some counterintuitive outcomes to that too.
So which ones would you feel comfortable commenting on?
I wouldn't want to be wholly responsible for the view on any one of those, simply because we have two real life CIOs and I'm not a CIO, but I do have a policy view. But certainly, you know, on pharma and large cap banks, energy, like non-US oil and gas and renewables, large MCOs in the healthcare area. Volatility, I think we have an expert that would just put to shame any attempt at wisdom that I could join, and asset managers as well. So I think there's a fear among asset managers that a Biden win would be, you know, potentially an adverse event, and I'm not so sure that that would be the case. But I don't know if your audience includes a large swath of the family offices. But one category we might want to touch on that wasn't on the list you sent around was tax and estate planning strategies. And I guess the question of whether people might want to accelerate those, you know, or do something with that. But I'll leave it to you.
Sure.
But those I can speak to fairly credibly.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Chris, any?
But not alone, but not alone.
Yeah. Well, you know what? This is meant to be a panel and give and take.
Yes.
You know, we like disagreements too. So I know that there are some diehard Republicans who have signed up for this. So I'm sure, you know, we're going to hear from them in the Q&A part as well. So, you know, it's all meant to be educational. Chris, are there certain areas, sectors you feel comfortable about? Just, you know, so I have a general idea. And
Yeah, sure. And by the way, we have a full hour. Is that the
full hour? Yeah.
An hour. Yeah, I think I would be comfortable talking about, you know, maybe big picture, how it has been, you know, how the managers I'm talking to are thinking about it. So the evolution of the trade, the long volatility, the basket of stocks, basket of stocks that do well under Democratic sweep, Republican sweep. And I could talk a little bit about some of the managers that are hiring private polling firms and political consultants to try to gain an edge. And RV trades that are kind of playing baskets of high tax equities versus low tax equities in a changing tax environment. These are some of the trades I've heard and have been following along with. So I'm happy to speak a little bit about that. I think that could be interesting for the audience.
Okay. And Eric, anything else that we haven't mentioned yet?
Well, I think just in terms of what I can speak to most knowledgeably, it would be currencies and volatility, given that, those are core things that we actually trade. We don't trade single name stocks, which is not to say that I wouldn't have an opinion on financials or energy, but I quite frankly, I'm way more interested in what Rebecca thinks than what I think about any of those things. And Chris, speaks with all kinds of folks who are focused on that. So I think their perspective would be much more interesting than mine. But specifically in volatility and currencies, those are, I spend a lot of my time on that. And I also think that Rebecca, I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts in terms of how you handicap not just a Biden win, because you shared some of your internal polling results, which are nice to hear. But kind of what happens with the Senate, because I think there are a whole bunch of different scenarios here, and I think a scenario where you have a clear Biden victory and the Democrats take the Senate is just a much different world from, take out all the kind of election uncertainty. Let's just imagine that we just finally get a winner, a clear winner, and whether a third of the country wants to accept it or not, it is what it is, and then we move on. Then what's the political landscape really look like? Can Biden get what he wants done, or is he just severely handicapped because he hasn't been able to? This is a very different world. Those two worlds are very different, in my opinion, from the perspective of answering the question about any of these, these particular topics, whether it's vol, whether it's, financials or healthcare, whatever. So that would be that'd be helpful, I'm sure, on the call to get your perspective. I'd love to know what it is right now.
Sure. Happy to, although just a quick asterisk, I don't know if you'd feel comfortable doing it, but I bet, it might be really interesting for Lois's viewers, if we were to maybe, I don't know if you feel you could speak to interest rate vol trading, which
Sure.
is trading below like 30-year averages. So, it's an attractive time to be looking at value plays like that. So that might be kind of an interesting thing to mention.
Yeah.
And coming out of the mouth of somebody that, is doing it. For people trying to look for opportunities, that might be a nice thing a nice tidbit for us to give them.
Yeah.
But to answer your question on the Senate, sadly, a majority in the Senate doesn't change the world too much. And that's for the simple reason that any large controversial piece of legislation that Biden might try to push through, and he'll only really have half of a first year in which to do it before we're back in midterm election season again in the House, is that you need 60 votes rather than 50, because if any senator objects, then that's a filibuster, and then you need 60 votes to overcome that filibuster. So 50 votes, having more than 50 votes, it doesn't get you much these days, except maybe a Supreme Court nominee, as of changes to the filibuster rule a couple of years ago, and anything related to the budget, which goes through something called a reconciliation process, and that just requires 50 votes as well. But you need 60 for anything big and tough. And the only thing that's going to be uncontroversial on his wish list, because both sides want it, is infrastructure investing. So you're going to want to see him out of the gate quickly on stuff that he can either do by executive action, or stuff in foreign policy or trade, because that's subject to something called a fast track authority that gives our executive a bit more leeway in negotiating on behalf of our entire country with other heads of state, and suppresses the role of the legislature a little bit in a way that the founders didn't originally bake into the rules. So, you'll see a huge flurry of activity, but front loaded with stuff that doesn't necessarily require legislative action, or stuff that's just so narrowly tailored that there really is a bipartisan consensus. And that's where the good news actually is. And that is that once the sort of the Trump, the Trump rub, I call them the Trumpumplicans, once the Trump thing has been removed, you'll see a reassertion of all of those moderate Republicans that right now are just laying low. When I worked in the Senate, we were quite, quite respectful of each other, and that was just a scant 20 years ago. And the biggest fights we used to have would be over office space. That world is long gone. But there's a reason why the framers made it hard for legislation to pass. And that is so that there wouldn't be these huge pendulum, swings with each election on the course our country's taking in any sector. Now, again, asterisks and caveats around that for healthcare, energy, financials, and tech, where you could actually do quite a bit and make changes, and then a Biden win, would be consequential, and you'd see some regulatory changes, if not legislative changes. But the regulatory side is where you're going to see a reassertion of democratic values and principles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good. Helpful.
Short answer.
Rebecca, what exactly are you doing for Biden now? Just for us here on the call?
Yeah, there's this rule that says that we're publicly not allowed to say what we're doing. And that's so that the way a presidential campaign works is you have a small core of actual paid volunteers, and you sweat those assets to death. So they tend to be really young and hungry people working for nothing, and usually having to flit around the country. But everybody, of course, is working from home right now. But that's really just something new and special in political campaigning. But then you have a huge cloud around that of unpaid senior people. And from time to time, you'll see somebody call themselves a senior advisor to the campaign. But they're all unpaid, so that if there's any sort of misstep or problem, then you can just cut them loose. But those tend to be the appointee hopefuls or the cabinet hopefuls. And then you have a bunch of people supporting those people. And that includes surrogates and others. But that's really, everything underneath the tip of the paid official campaign iceberg. And so you have hundreds of people working for months to map out, the entire legislative agenda for 2 terms for somebody coming in, because you have to be that prepared coming in to get anything done while you're president. So that process was done, mapped out for all 8 years when I was working for the Obama campaign by June. So we're a little behind on that, in part because of the playbook being tossed by COVID. But what I'm doing is, I originally started in foreign policy just because those were all the guys that I knew and felt comfortable with. And I worked for them on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I have an affinity for anything foreign policy, just for fun. But then, because foreign policy was not going to matter nearly as much as we thought it was going to, in fact, it ranks as the second least most important thing to voters after the least most important, which shockingly perhaps is abortion. People simply don't care. It's healthcare and the economy right now that we're going to be graded on. I got moved over to legal. So I'm doing special legal projects right now, and almost all of my work right now is around voter protection and making sure that we understand all of the election in-person and absentee rules that are still being spun out and changed by states as we speak, and then also contested election stuff. that's what I'm doing right now.
Good.
Rebecca, what is the what's the level of investment that the campaign is making in your area? You're focused on that. Are you working with 100 people, or are you working with 5 people?
So the paid campaign staff, just to give you a sense of this iceberg, right? The paid campaign staff is 4 people, with Bob Bauer at the top of it, and he's known to be in that spot. He's the, but he's outside the campaign, so he's not the general counsel, but he sits on top of the general counsel. A wonderful woman that used to be an associate of his back in a prior life, and then 2 paid people, one of whom is quite junior but very lovely. And then under those paid 4 people are say like between 100 and 200 volunteers who were vetted, are trusted, maybe worked for Biden before, that kind of thing. And then you have thousands of people who are on the payroll as lawyers, doing the state stuff, or doing the vetting of people that we're starting to fill in on the whiteboard who we want in different positions. So preparing them for nomination processes. And that's done formally on a paid basis because attorney-client privilege and things like that become very important. But it helps keep our legal costs down, that a lot of the yeoman's work is done by people who are, like me, pressing pause on their careers and working for free.
Good for you. I'm just trying to get a sense for
we're ready.
What level of emphasis the campaign is placing on this issue of voter suppression?
Very high, very high. In part because it's a turnout issue for us, meaning it only helps us for him to be playing these games. You know, and the only reason he's playing these games is because there are a handful of states, contested states, that have one very, very large metropolitan area, and it's the metropolitan areas that are getting hit by COVID the hardest, and those are the places where people are most likely to vote absentee. So if he can suppress votes, absentee votes, that'll bite into the blue vote in those particular states, but it's really only 4 states where all of this bluster is going to really matter much.
And that's Florida, Wisconsin.
Detroit will be important. Yeah, those places. So, and Pennsylvania, but there are large swaths of rural Pennsylvania too. So, but it's enough that he has sufficiently few paths to win that this is existential for him.
Right.
Those 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and you've
what you're seeing is
you've taken North Carolina out of that. So.
Yeah, only because North Carolina is so red.
Okay.
That the bump he'll get from suppressing absentee ballots in metropolitan areas in North Carolina is going to be fairly modest.
Got it.
So it matters less there. But in other states, you see a big, you see a big, blue pinprick of a city surrounded by a sea of rural red. But the sad thing is that it's the rural areas that traditionally have been most likely to vote absentee. That's why most of the states that have these great absentee ballot infrastructures, like Colorado, where it's all paid and super, you can track your ballot and tons of resources and AI attached to different things, are Republican, because you've got people who don't want to have to drive in somewhere and spend hours online. But this year it's flipped, and it's the COVID people huddled in their, metropolitan apartments that, you want to coax out. But what you're seeing is this is encouraging for us because it's a sign of his desperation. There are very few paths for him at this stage.
Yeah. Well, good for you for dedicating part of your career to that. It's awesome.
I think when you see what has happened, and you don't do your bit, then it's really, I think, hard to justify. Interestingly, just as an aside, and this is Lois's call, but a lot of our fundraisers have a huge percentage of Republicans on them. And I was just recently on a fundraiser for alums of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senate, Republicans and Democrats. It was 50-50. And they said, we want to take let's take back the Republic, because this is, not who we are. And we're really biting into his base right now, which is non-college educated white people. For a bunch of reasons, including jobs. An interesting thing is his alma mater just came out recently scoring the 2 economic plans such as they are. And the job creation is especially the blue collar job creation is on the Biden side of things. And people know this, and you'll always have those unpersuadables, right? But there's just not enough of them.
Great. Good to hear. Good to hear. You make a lot of money in the betting sites right now because your internal numbers are way off.
I know.
I mean, I've maxed out in kind of the predicted voting, because I can't believe it's, right now it's only an 80% probability that Biden wins the popular vote, and it just seems absurd to
97%.
Right. Yeah, right. So, and then just the it's like 55-45 in terms of Biden winning. And it seems the only issue that to me is an issue is voter suppression. If we get enough college people like you working on that, then I think it's pretty clear. But if you somehow fail in your efforts, then
or an assassination. I mean, it's real. Like the threats are out of this world, and you should have seen some of them coming in from the Sanders camp after Sanders didn't get the nomination. Really? So I've never seen anything like this. The amount of anger on both sides, extremes. Yeah, but this isn't something we'll be sharing on the call.
Sure.
And certainly we're not taking for granted any advantage. And God forbid something happened to Biden health-wise between now and the election, which is 35 days away.
Bubble wrap.
That's what I told him. I was like, triple bubble wrap.
Just exactly. Good.
We bubble wrapped Ruth, but it didn't work. So you never know, So.
Okay, well, there's a lot to talk about, and you guys are really on it. It's terrific. Eric, I get Chris's newsletter. Can I get a copy of yours and see it? And everybody should get both of them. See what they.
Yeah, I'll send around.
Yeah, and your flow chart, Rebecca, would be great. Just any other topics that we should include that we haven't yet talked about?
There's so many things we could talk about. Lois, I do have a question. Could you just talk through the audience a little bit? You touched on it lightly, but who do you think is going to be listening?
Yeah, we've opened this up to everyone just because it's such an interesting topic. A lot of our things. Well, most of the things we do are open to like family offices and institutions. So there will be, a good number of family offices on, but there will also be other people too. I just thought we should open it up. And I think we have about 60 or something registered at the moment. So, should be quite good, and they will ask a lot of questions. And as I said before, I know there's a very staunch Republican in the audience, and I'm sure he's going to be very vocal as well. And, that's fine. And
well, you're thinking about one specific member.
Yeah, you know who he is, right? Were you at the conference with the China person speaking at lunch?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, I remember.
Family office person.
Yeah.
How
So,
many minutes for Q&A will they get, Lois?
well, I mean, we can go on as long as we want. So it's not like after an hour it shuts down. Um, I don't know, usually we do like 40 minutes of panel and then open it up for Q&A, but it doesn't have to be. And I don't know, any thoughts on that?
I think everyone truly likes it to stick to an hour. I think that should be our
Yeah,
best case. Yeah.
yeah, okay. I mean,
Will it be recorded and available afterwards, or
well,
what are you doing?
usually we do, but it doesn't have to be. So, or we can cut out certain pieces. So if something sensitive is on there that you don't want on there, we don't have to post it, but it's
And you
really
have
up
editorial control.
to you.
Yeah.
Everyone, I'm sorry I need to jump to a 10 o'clock, but I feel really good about this and I'm excited for it. I look forward to it.
Good,
Yeah,
okay.
likewise. All right.
So,
Lois, Rebecca,
okay,
Chris.
I'm just gonna write up summary notes and send them out so we all have them. And if you think of any other points, just let me know.
Great. Thank
Thank
you.
Oh,
you.
one
Yeah.
more question. Lois, do you do anything like polls or anything on Zoom, or do you keep it pretty straight?
We do in-depth surveys, and I've been thinking, Chris, I've been thinking maybe we should do something kind of, I don't know.
Interactive?
Yeah, I'd like to. Your thoughts? What do you think? I mean, it would be helpful.
Well, what's interesting is sometimes using those polls to get the audience's view on something before, the so-called panel experts opine, and it might be interesting to do that for the sectors. Or some, maybe just 2 or 3 questions that are bound to be raised by the moderator to take their temperature and then have us say, well, in fact, counterintuitively, or, yep, your intuition is correct or something. I don't know. And I don't, it's been a while since I've signed up for a seminar. So I just wanted to know for myself what to expect.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea. I think it'd be good.
Hey, Rebecca, before you hop off, just curious, you mentioned that you think in the case that the Biden wins, it's going to take some time before he can really implement anything. And presumably, you spoke about how kind of the bipartisan issues, infrastructure, which I agree on. Do you have any sense, or what would be your opinion in terms of how quickly something like that could be implemented? And do you have any opinion around the type of size that a program like that would take?
I believe that those conversations are already taking place with key Republican moderates to feel out what their appetite might be. Some of this will depend on the vaccine, because any spending for anything else will take a backseat to vaccine purchase and distribution. And we just don't know when that's going to happen. If that happens early and it's a one shot like the Johnson & Johnson thing, that's one scenario. And but either way, you'll see that happen before, the midterm elections. The exact timing of it and the size of it is COVID dependent.
Okay.
And God forbid there be a second wave, and then we have to, go through the PPE drill and all that again.
Right.
And then healthcare will throw money at that.
Yeah. Yeah. So pretty uncertain, really.
It's like what Governor Cuomo said, tell me what's going to happen. You guys know, I don't know. You're the ones putting on the mask or not putting on the mask.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Very
Great.
good.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, talk to you all.
Take care.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.